How many times can true love blossom in the same lifetime, and are we brave enough to fight for it when the second chance comes along? Hi, I'm Yuna, and I welcome you to Happiness of Love. Get ready for an exciting story that will leave you amazed. Enjoy the video, and may God bless you and your entire family. Have an amazing day. Amelia Davis stood in front of her laptop, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as if every word that didn't come was a direct blow to her self-esteem. The cursor blinked on the white screen, mocking his inability to weave even a worthwhile sentence. Beside him, a mug of cold coffee, abandoned the previous morning, was the only company in his silent apartment in the heart of New York. She exhaled a heavy sigh, sinking into the couch as she squinted against the glare of the screen. 3 months without delivering a decent chapter to his publisher and the threat of cancellation looming like an impending snowstorm. That's when the phone rang, a sharp sound that broke the suffocating silence. She answered without looking at the ID, hoping it was her literary agent again urging her to find her muse. But the voice on the other end was warm, familiar, an unexpected balm. "Amelia, dear, your grandmother needs you here." Mildred Davis's voice, soft as the sound of Christmas bells in the distance, made Amelia sit up straighter on the couch. "What? Did something happen?" she asked, her heart racing with worry. "Oh, it's nothing serious," Mildred replied, but the hesitation in her grandmother's voice made her raise an eyebrow. "It's about the festival. This year, it looks like we're in trouble. We don't have many volunteers, and donations are low. And, well, you know how much this event means to Snowbrook. For me." Amelia closed her eyes, an avalanche of memories washing over her. The Snowbrook Christmas Festival was more than a tradition, it was the beating heart of the small town during the holiday season. She could vividly remember children singing in choirs, the smell of gingerbread cookies wafting through the air, and the central square shining with twinkling lights. It's not that she wanted to ignore her grandmother's call, but Snowbrook was a Pandora's box that she had avoided opening for years. The place held more than happy memories, it was also where she had left Ethan Bennett, and with him, part of her heart. "Mildred, perhaps you could ask the committee for help. They always manage to find a way." The pause on the other side was long. "They tried, baby. But the truth is that we need someone who brings new energy. And I thought maybe you wanted to come here, who knows, maybe this will inspire you to finish your book." Amelia stared at the laptop screen again, the cursor still blinking like a beacon of despair. After another long sigh, she surrendered. "Okay, Grandma. I go. I promise to be there next weekend." The gratitude and relief in Mildred's voice warmed her more than any blanket could. A week later, the scene around him couldn't be more different. Snowbrook looked straight out of a Christmas postcard. Snowflakes fell softly on sloping rooftops, and the shops along Main Street were decorated with garlands, windows illuminated by twinkling lights, and hand-painted signs announcing free hot chocolate and Christmas fare. In the center of the square, a huge Christmas tree was partially decorated, as if eagerly awaiting the final touch to shine. Amelia got out of the rental car with a slight tremor caused by both the cold and the weight of memories. Her grandmother was waiting for her on the porch of the house, wrapped in a woolen shawl and with the warm smile that only Mildred knew how to give. "Welcome back, my girl. I missed you so much." Amelia walked through the small gate and ran into her grandmother's arms. "I missed you too, Mildred. But it's only for a while, okay? I'll go back to New York as soon as the festival is organized." Mildred just laughed, a sound that resonated like music to Amelia. "Let's see, baby, Snowbrook has a way of making people stay." Amelia felt a chill, but this time it wasn't caused by the winter cold. It was the nagging feeling that his grandmother might be right. As soon as Amelia finished unloading her bags and tidying up her old room that had looked untouched since her teenage years, Mildred called her to a community meeting in the church hall. "We need to start organizing everything for the festival, darling. And now that you're here, you can help us find creative solutions." Amelia hesitated, looking at her watch. She still felt exhausted from the trip, but the urgent tone in her grandmother's voice was unmistakable. Furthermore, she couldn't deny that she was curious to see how things had changed or not in the city since the last time she was there. The church hall was filled with familiar voices and smells, the pine scent of hanging wreaths and freshly brewed coffee that seemed to unite the diverse group of residents. Amelia recognized almost everyone, but there was something different in the air, a palpable tension that she didn't remember associating with Snowbrook's always upbeat Christmas spirit. Mildred called the meeting to order with a firm rap of a spoon on the edge of a pan, and the side conversations gradually subsided. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice clear and firm, but with a note of concern that didn't go unnoticed. "We all know that this festival is the heart of our city, but this year we are facing greater difficulties than ever. With the lack of donations and fewer tourists last year, our budget is stretched to the limit. If we cannot raise funds quickly, we will be able to afford the lights, the tree, not even the choir." Amelia looked around, taking in the dark, murmured expressions of disappointment. Even the most optimistic, like Mrs. Mary at the cafe on the corner, seemed discouraged. She felt a pang in her chest. This wasn't the Snowbrook spirit she remembered. Why did it seem like everyone had given up before even trying? We need ideas, Mildred continued, and we need someone willing to lead that effort. The eyes turned to Amelia, and she almost shrank in her chair. Oh, no, she began, raising her hands as if she could wave away the responsibility. I've barely just arrived. I don't know if I'm the right person for this. But the grandmother's steady gaze said more than words. You've always had a talent for creating enchanting stories, Amelia. Perhaps it's time to use it to create an enchanting festival as well. Before Amelia could think of a more elaborate protest, the hall door opened with a slight creak. All eyes turned to the man who entered, and the air in the room seemed to change instantly. He was there, Ethan Bennett, taller and even more confident than she remembered. Wearing a smart coat and his hair slightly tousled in the breeze, he looked a perfect picture of urban success out of place in the cozy, modest setting. Amelia felt such a sudden sinking in her stomach that she had to look away to hide the blush that was creeping up her face. What was he doing there? Ethan had left Snowbrook years ago, taking with him more than memories. He had taken the remains of something that could have been a great love. And now, he looked as at ease as an unexpected visitor on Christmas Eve. Ethan, called Mildred, with a warm smile. It's good to have you back. Come in, come in. We're trying to resolve this year's festival issue. Ethan nodded politely as he approached, greeting those present with a calm charm that seemed to disarm even the most skeptical. Then his eyes met Amelia's. For a brief moment, the world around him seemed to dissipate. She saw the gleam of recognition in his gaze, but also something else, perhaps surprise, or even a hint of hurt masked by the composure he displayed so well. Amelia tried to swallow the feeling of vulnerability that rose in her throat, but it was useless. He was a living reminder of all the decisions she'd rather forget, and now he was there, in the middle of her city, in the middle of her life again. Amelia, he said, with a slight nod. His voice had the same depth she remembered, but it seemed calmer, more controlled. I didn't expect to find you here. The words had an implicit weight that only the two of them understood. Neither did I expect to see you, she replied, trying to keep her tone neutral. But it was clear that something invisible moved between them, something that others in the room could feel, even if they didn't understand. Ethan offered to help, Mildred announced, interrupting the tense moment between the two. He has experience with events and marketing. Maybe he can bring some new ideas to save the festival. Ethan smiled modestly. I'm happy to help. Snowbrook will always be special to me. Amelia felt a chill run down her spine when she heard those words. They sounded nice, but she knew Ethan's relationship with the city was more complicated than he made it seem. And, of course, there was the past that connected them, a story full of unwritten chapters and question marks. The meeting continued, but Amelia could barely concentrate. Ethan's presence seemed to fill every corner of the room, as if the mere sight of him brought to the surface feelings she'd spent years trying to suppress. When the meeting finally came to an end, she barely had time to leave before he approached. Amelia, he called softly, and she stopped, feeling her breathing quicken. Can we talk? Just for a minute. She turned slowly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, she replied, even though everything inside her wanted to escape that conversation. The day after the meeting, Snowbrook morning arrived with a clear sky and a frost that sparkled like diamonds on the roofs of the houses and the lawns of the squares. Amelia was in her grandmother's kitchen, helping to prepare a batch of gingerbread cookies. It was a comforting habit, a distraction she used to calm the whirlwind of emotions caused by Ethan's unexpected presence. However, the tranquility was interrupted by a knock on the door. It must be him, said Mildred, straightening her apron. Amelia froze, feeling her heart racing. Who? He asked, even though he already knew the answer. Before he could argue, the grandmother went to the door, opening it with a warm smile. There stood Ethan, in a gray coat that seemed perfectly in line with his impeccable posture. Good morning, Mildred, he greeted in a soft tone, but his eyes soon found Amelia, who was holding a bowl of dough as if it were a shield. I hope I'm not in the way. Amelia placed the bowl on the counter with more force than she intended and crossed her arms. You're early, she said, with a slight defensive tone. I don't remember us agreeing on a time. I thought I'd speed things up, he replied, ignoring the sting. His tone was neutral, but there was an amused gleam in his eyes, something that irritated her. It was the same Ethan who always managed to remain calm while leaving her disarmed and confused. Excellent. Mildred interrupted, cutting the tension before it escalated. You two can start with decorating the square. Amelia, darling, show him where the decorations are. Amelia sighed, resigned, and picked up her coat while Ethan held the door for her. Thank you, she said dryly, walking past him. As soon as they left, the tension in the air seemed to increase, like the promise of a snowstorm. In the central square, the feeling was one of pure nostalgia, but Amelia didn't have time to get lost in the memories. There were boxes of lights, decorative balls and ribbons scattered around in a chaos that demanded organization. Ethan approached, examining the place as if it were some kind of battlefield. "Where do we start?" he asked, still with that casual tone that made her want to explode. "It depends," Amelia replied, without looking at him. "Are you used to organizing festivals, or is your leadership experience limited to running office meetings?" Ethan laughed, a low, genuine sound that surprised her. "I was expecting some resistance from you, but have we started with personal attacks? Interesting." She turned, eyes narrowed. "It would be interesting for you to explain why you decided to help. Because, to me, this seems like another attempt to ease your conscience." "Ease my conscience?" He raised an eyebrow. "Do you think I have something to prove to you?" Amelia felt her face heat up, but she refused to look away. "I don't know, Ethan. You returned to Snowbrook after years. Without warning. Without saying a word to anyone. What else should I think?" For a moment he didn't respond, and the silence was filled by the distant sound of children playing in the snow. Ethan finally sighed and crossed his arms. "I didn't come back for you, Amelia, if that's what you're implying." She felt a small blow to her pride, but masked it with a cynical smile. "That's good to hear." As they worked, the initial friction turned into a kind of reluctant truce. Ethan began to help untangle the lights, while Amelia organized the ribbons by color. At some point, she caught him looking at the central tree, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Do you still remember the night we hung the decorations on the tree by ourselves?" he asked, unexpectedly. Amelia stopped, her fingers holding a star-shaped ornament. The memory came in a flash, she and Ethan, still teenagers, laughing in the moonlight as they decorated the same tree, talking about the future. "I remember," she admitted, lowering her gaze to hide the rush of nostalgia. "It was before everything. Before everything fell apart," he added, his voice low but full of meaning. When she looked up, she found his gaze fixed on hers, as if he too was reliving that moment. Snowbrook, 7 years ago. Ethan and Amelia were sitting on the grass next to the tree, with the lights twinkling softly in the background. She laughed at something silly he had said, the sound echoing in the cold night air. "You should come with me to New York," he suggested, taking her hand. Amelia looked at him, surprised. "New York? You know I can't. My life is here." He held her gaze, his expression serious for the first time that night. "I want you in my life, Amelia. Wherever." She hesitated, feeling the weight of those words and everything they meant. "What if I can't?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His response was immediate but full of pain. "Then I'll go alone." Amelia returned to the present with a heavy sigh, feeling the emotions of that moment return as if it were yesterday. Ethan looked away, as if he too was trying to shake off the weight of the past. "I think the lights are in place," he said, changing the subject. "Great," she replied, hurrying to collect the leftovers. But as they walked back, they both knew that their conversation had touched something deep a wound that had not yet completely healed. The sky over Snowbrook was painted with shades of blue and gold when Amelia arrived at the town square that morning. The soft sunlight seemed to highlight every detail of the scene, the untouched snow on the rooftops, the glow of the garlands that had already been hung the day before, and the distant murmur of the frozen brook. She found Ethan leaning over a toolbox, examining brackets for the lights that would be installed on the main stage. He looked as comfortable in that space as an actor rehearsing a well-known play, but there was a visible line of tension in his shoulders that not even the perfect set seemed to alleviate. "Do you need help or are you just trying to look busy?" Amelia asked, trying to hide her growing nervousness at being alone with him. Ethan looked up, a faint smile appearing on his lips. "It depends. Can you tell the difference between a hammer and a screwdriver?" "I know how to write a manual on this, which is more useful," she replied, walking over to him. There was something strange about the ease with which they spoke, as if the past didn't hover between them like a ghost. As the day progressed, they worked side by side, setting up booths for tents and brainstorming ideas for the tree decorating contest. Ethan, notebook in hand, seemed genuinely interested in hearing Amelia's opinions, even if they were surrounded by scathing comments. He suggested a digital voting system to attract young people, and Amelia countered by saying that the simplicity of paper ballots was the festival's charm. Despite the differences, there were times when their eyes met for longer than necessary, and Amelia could feel a familiar warmth growing in her chest. She noticed small gestures that once enchanted her, the way Ethan frowned when he concentrated, or the slight curve of his lips when he made an inside joke. It was like rediscovering parts of a puzzle she thought she had lost forever. In the late afternoon, after hours of work, Amelia and Ethan sat on one of the benches near the central tree. Fatigue finally caught up with them, but there was a feeling of complicity that they both pretended not to notice. Ethan, looking at the silent square, finally broke the silence. "You know, it's not just the festival that brought me back to Snowbrook." His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if admitting this was an act of vulnerability he rarely allowed. Amelia tilted her head, curious but cautious. So what was it? Did you need fresh air? He let out a brief but humorless laugh. Something like that. Or maybe I needed air, away from my company. He rubbed his hands together, the cold evident in his gesture. Things in New York have gotten complicated. There are decisions being made that go against everything I believed in when I started my career. And to be honest, I don't know if I can continue to be a part of this anymore. Amelia studied his face, noticing for the first time the shadow of exhaustion under his eyes and the weight he seemed to carry on his shoulders. It was a side of Ethan she'd never seen before. The confident, ambitious man she'd known was there, but now with a hint of vulnerability that made her want to know more. Complicated how? She asked, her voice softer than she planned. He hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. There was a project, a software we developed to optimize financial processes in small businesses. But after it was released, we discovered that some corporations were using it to exploit legal loopholes and harm small businesses. I tried to intervene, but the board. They only saw the profits. Ethan looked away, his jaw tense. I realized I was losing control of what I created. And somehow, I lost control of myself, too. Amelia felt a wave of compassion mixed with surprise. She had always seen Ethan as someone who was unwavering, but now she was faced with a man who seemed to be questioning every choice he had made. And then you came to Snowbrook, she said, her voice soft. To meet again? He looked at her, and for a moment, the intensity in his eyes was almost palpable. Maybe I came because I knew that here, at least for a while, I could remember who I was. Who I wanted to be. The words hovered between them like snow that was beginning to fall, silent but loaded with meaning. Amelia felt the cold air on her cheeks, but it was the warmth of his presence that seemed hardest to ignore. She wanted to say something, to comfort him, but at the same time, she didn't know if she was the right person to offer that. Later, as they gathered up their tools and prepared to leave, Ethan did something unexpected. He took off the scarf he was wearing and wrapped it around Amelia's neck. You're shaking, he said, with a simplicity that disarmed her. I'm fine, she protested, but the warmth of the fabric and his gesture made her stop. For an instant, their eyes met again, and Amelia felt the space between them shrink, not physically, but emotionally. She could feel old feelings awakening, like embers beneath the snow. Come on, he said finally, pulling away to keep the moment from stretching out too long. But even as they walked together through the silent square, Amelia knew something had changed between them, something neither of them seemed ready to name. The sun was setting over Snowbrook when Amelia arrived at the central square, now lit by strings of lights that volunteers had installed the day before. The soft glow made the space feel like it was straight out of a Christmas dream. Ethan was there, as she knew he would be, kneeling near the stage, attaching some wooden pieces to the support that would support the festival's main sign. He was so focused that he didn't notice her arrival. Amelia hesitated for a moment, watching him from afar, as if she could glean something of his emotions just from the way he held the tools. There was a confusing mix of feelings inside her. The rational side said it was too risky to let herself be carried away by old feelings, but something deeper, something she couldn't control, made her long for his presence. The way he spoke, the way his eyes seemed to see beyond the facade she had built over the last few years. But along with this came the fear, cold and persistent, that everything would end as before, with broken promises and a void impossible to fill. Are you going to stay there and spy on me, or are you going to help me? Ethan's voice brought her back to the moment, and she realized he was looking at her, a smile playing on his lips. Amelia felt her face flush and quickly grabbed the bag of decorative bows she had brought. I wasn't spying. I was just absorbing the spirit of the festival, he replied, trying to sound casual. Of course. Who doesn't like to admire unfinished signs? He laughed, and she shook her head, trying not to smile, but that easy smile of his disarmed her in a way nothing else did. As they worked together on the stage, set a composition that included hand-painted sleds, piles of fake gifts, and strategically scattered artificial snow, Amelia noticed that the mood between them was lighter than before. There was still an underlying tension, like strings pulled too tight, but now it seemed like they were both willing to let go of the past, if only for a few hours. Do you remember when we did something similar for the spring fair? Ethan asked, holding a sled as she adjusted the ribbons around it. The question came suddenly, and the note of nostalgia in his voice took her by surprise. Amelia stopped, her hands still holding the golden ribbons. Are you talking about that time you tried to use hot glue and ended up sticking your hand to the table? Ethan laughed, a warm sound that made her smile involuntarily. I was trying to be efficient. I didn't know hot glue was so permanent. You spent weeks complaining that you couldn't hold the pen properly, she said, laughter escaping her lips. It was such a simple moment, but at the same time, so full of meaning. There was a comforting familiarity in remembering together moments that, despite being small, were so important to both of them. Yes, he said, his voice softer now. But it was that night that I decided I wanted to take you with me to New York. I thought if we could do something this silly together and still have fun, we could face anything." The words hung in the air like slowly falling snowflakes. Amelia felt a tightness in her chest, a mixture of pain and longing. "Did you really believe that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I believed it," he replied, and the intensity in his eyes made her look away. "But I don't think you do." Amelia straightened up, pulling the ribbons tighter than necessary. "It's not that I didn't believe. It's just, I couldn't risk it." She realized her voice was shaking and took a deep breath before continuing. "My life was here, Ethan. My family. My job. I couldn't just leave it all behind." He moved a little closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "And you think it was easy for me to leave everything behind? Snowbrook? You?" She looked at him, and for the first time in years, allowed him to see the vulnerability in her eyes. "No, I know it wasn't easy, but it seemed like you had already decided everything without consulting me. As if my choice didn't matter." Ethan shook his head, frustration evident on his face. "You had a choice, Amelia. I asked you to come with me. I would have done anything to keep you by my side." She was silent, unable to respond. His words were a painful echo of what could have been, and the hurt they both carried was too evident to ignore. As the silence between them deepened, dusk began to turn to night, and the first stars appeared in the sky above the square. Ethan bent down to adjust the sled again, and when he stood up, they were closer than before. Amelia could feel his breathing, and for a moment, it felt like the world around her had disappeared. The intensity of Ethan's gaze took her breath away, and she knew he felt the same way. "Amelia," he murmured, his voice so low it seemed to be lost in the cold breeze. She didn't respond, but her eyes moved to his lips, as if an invisible force was guiding her. The space between them slowly closed, and Amelia felt her heart race. Everything in his mind told him to back off, but his body seemed unable to obey. And then, as if the universe had decided it was too soon for this moment, a group of children running across the square broke into the silence, shouting happily as they threw snowballs at each other. Ethan took a step back, the spell broken, and Amelia felt a mix of relief and disappointment. "Better finish this," he said, with a shy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Amelia just nodded, feeling that something important had been left unfinished between them. The day before the festival arrived with a mix of anticipation and nervousness in Snowbrook. The central square was practically ready, enveloped in a magical glow of lights that twinkled like stars in sync. Residents moved frantically, adjusting the last details: the stage for the performances, the hot chocolate and gingerbread stands, the large central tree decorated with shiny baubles and red bows. But for Amelia, that morning didn't bring the usual comfort of Christmas traditions. She was in the city hall basement, helping her grandmother organize documents from the event. Mildred wanted to make sure everything was in order: the volunteer list, the tent costs, the arrangements with local vendors. Amelia absently leafed through papers, but her mind was occupied. The almost kiss with Ethan still haunted her, a moment that seemed to have created more questions than answers in her heart. When she found an envelope with the logo of an unknown company, she felt her curiosity piqued. The name engraved at the top, Greenhill Developments, seemed out of place among the community records. When he opened it, he found a preliminary proposal that made his stomach turn cold: Snowbrook Resort Project transforming the city into a luxury destination. The proposal included a detailed plan to redevelop Snowbrook, replacing small local shops with upscale boutiques and modern resorts. The city's simple charm, the same one that made it look like a Christmas postcard, would be replaced by cold, commercial structures. And there, at the bottom of one of the pages, Ethan Bennett's name was listed as one of the associated consultants. Amelia felt the blood rush to her face. The rapid pulse made it impossible to think clearly. He couldn't be involved in this. Not after everything that had happened, not after so many promises to help Snowbrook. With the envelope in her hands, she left the basement determined to confront him. Ethan was in the square, adjusting the spotlights that would illuminate the main tree. He seemed calm, almost relaxed, as if the simple act of contributing to the festival brought some kind of peace. But to Amelia, his every gesture now seemed tinged with falsehood. "Can I talk to you?" Her voice cut through the cold air like a blade, serious and without the friendly tone he had become accustomed to hearing in the last few days. Ethan turned, immediately noticing the rigid expression on her face. "Of course. What happened?" He got off the stairs and walked over to her, wiping his hands on his work pants. Amelia held out the papers toward him. "Can you explain to me what this is?" Ethan took the documents, and his expression slowly transformed. First surprise, then something more difficult to decipher: perhaps guilt, perhaps exhaustion. He sighed deeply before speaking. "Amelia, I can explain." "Then explain," she interrupted him, crossing her arms. "Because to me, this seems like the exact opposite of what you promised. You said you were here to help, but it seems like all you want is to destroy what Snowbrook stands for." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as if he was choosing his words carefully. This is a preliminary proposal from my company. Yes, they suggested this project, but I never approved anything. But your name is here, Ethan, she said, pointing to the page. You knew that. You knew and didn't say anything to me. I didn't tell you because there's nothing decided, he countered, his voice starting to rise slightly, as if he tried to contain his frustration. Amelia, do you really think I would accept something like this? Turning Snowbrook into something I wouldn't even recognize? How could I know what to believe? She stepped back, her eyes shining with tears she refused to shed. You have left before, Ethan. Why should I trust that now you are here for something beyond convenience? The pain in her words hit him like a blow. He ran a hand over his hair, his eyes fixed on the floor for a moment. I came back because I was lost, he finally admitted, his low voice, but loaded with emotion. I came back because Snowbrook was the only place that made sense to me, and because I needed a second chance. Not only with the city. With you. Amelia felt something inside her waver. His words, so truly carried, hit a place in her heart that she tried to protect at all costs. But the fear was still greater. And do you think you'll make it hiding things? Working with people who want to destroy everything this city represents? Ethan looked up, and what she saw there was not anger, but a deep tiredness. I'm not perfect, Amelia. But I'm trying. And if you can't see it, then maybe I've been back to the wrong place. The silence that followed was deafening. Amelia wanted to answer. I wanted to say something that could undo the growing distance between them, but couldn't. He stepped back, holding the papers hard. I'm going to solve this, he said finally, before turning around and leaving the square, leaving Amelia alone in the growing cold of the night. Amelia remained there for a long time, observing the lights of the square flashing as if mimicked the rapid beats of her heart. Ethan's words echoed in his mind. I needed a second chance. She knew he was being honest, but the pain of the past still held her as invisible chains. When she returned home, her grandmother immediately realized that something was wrong. Honey, what happened? Mildred asked, placing a cup of hot tea on the table in front of him. I don't know what to believe, grandmother, Amelia replied, her trembling voice. I feel like I'm drowning in feelings I can't control. Mildred put his hand on hers, offering silent comfort. Sometimes, honey, when we are afraid to hurt ourselves, we forget to see how much others are fighting. Maybe you should hear your heart this time. Amelia held the cup hard, as if the warmth could relieve the internal storm that consumed it. But at that moment, all she knew was that she needed answers. Ethan, herself, her own heart. The festival night had finally arrived. Snowbrook Central Square was more alive than ever, full of smiling families, children running with cups of hot chocolate and couples walking hand in hand in the soft light of the decorations. The Christmas tree, now completely decorated and enlightened, reigned majestic in the center of the square, reflecting on the floor covered in snow like a headlight of hope and celebration. But for Amelia, there was a weight in the air that she couldn't ignore. Despite the joy around him, the confrontation with Ethan was still burning in his mind like a candle he could not erase. She was close to the stage, helping to adjust the microphone to the children's choir when she heard passos approaching. It was as if she knew, without looking, who was coming. Amelia, Ethan's family voice called, deep and hesitant. She turned slowly, finding him still a few meters, her hands stuck in the pockets of the coat. There was something in his eyes, a mix of determination and vulnerability that made his heart accelerate. I'm not heading to another discussion now, Ethan, she said, crossing her arms in an attempt to create a barrier. But she knew it was useless. I know, he replied, approaching carefully. I didn't come to argue. Just to say what I should have said a long time ago. Amelia stared at him, surprised with the tone in her voice. There was a gravity there, a weight she couldn't ignore. I'm listening, he said, though the knot in his throat would make words difficult. Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering all the courage he had. When I left Snowbrook, I thought I was doing the right thing. I had an opportunity in New York, something that could change my life. And I thought you would go with me. I thought your love for me was enough for it. Amelia felt the words reach her heart like knives. And when I said I couldn't, you just left, she answered, her voice shaking. As if my life here meant nothing. I know, he said quickly, the clear pain on his face. And that's what I regret every day, Amelia. I didn't go, but I didn't fight us anymore. I left you, and that was the biggest mistake of my life. She looked away, trying to contain the tears. The cold of the night seemed to increase around them, but the intensity of the moment made her forget her frost in her cheeks. You're telling me this now, Ethan? After all these years? Why? He stepped forward, hesitating before continuing. Because I can no longer pretend I don't feel anything. I couldn't overcome you, Amelia. I tried to lose myself at work, other people, in other cities, but nothing worked. So when it all started to collapse in my company, there was only one place where I wanted to be, here. The words were said with such honesty that Amelia felt her own resistance hesitance. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw an Ethan completely stripped of pride, vulnerable in a way she had never witnessed. "Do you think just because you're sorry, everything can be as before?" she asked, although her voice was not the accusatory tone she intended. Instead, it seemed a desperate request for answers. "No," he said, his voice firm. "But I want to try. I want to do what I didn't do before. I want to fight for us, Amelia." The silence that followed seemed eternal, broken only by the distant sound of laughter and the light tilt of the lights in the central tree. And then, as if the universe conspired in their favor, snowflakes began to fall, light and silent. The brightness of the lights reflected in the flakes, creating a scenario that seemed taken from a fairy tale. Amelia felt the snow on her hair, but all she could focus was on the man in front of her. There was something in his eyes, a silent appeal, an unlisted promise that made her abandon her defenses, even for a moment. "Do you really believe you can make me trust you again?" she asked, the voice almost a whisper. Ethan did not respond with words. Instead, he took the final step that separated them, stopping in centimeters. Her gaze plunged to hers, and for a moment it seemed that the whole world was disappeared, leaving only two in downtown Snowbrook. "Let me try," he said softly, before leaning to her. The kiss happened as naturally as the snow that fell around them. It was sweet, but loaded with emotion, a mixture of longing, regret, and the hope of a new beginning. Amelia felt her heart accelerate, but for the first time in years, she didn't try to control what she was feeling. She let the barriers fall, at least at that moment, while his lips pressed his own with the urgency of someone who didn't want to lose another chance. When they walked away, both were breathless, the snowflakes melting in their warm cheeks. Ethan looked at her with an intensity that made her shudder, but this time it was not cold. "I still love you, Amelia," he confessed, and the simplicity of the sentence hit her as a wave. "I always loved it." She felt her tears run down, but this time she didn't try to hide them. "I don't know what to do with it," Ethan admitted, the voice shaking. "But maybe I want to try too." He smiled, a genuine smile and full of relief. So it's a beginning. The festival was in full activity the next morning, but for Amelia, the noise around it seemed like a distant blur. Each light flashing, every child laugh, every snowflake falling kindly only seemed to reinforce the whirlwind inside it. The night before it had been so intense that she had barely able to sleep. The kiss, the words of Ethan, the implicit promises all echoed in his mind as an insistent melody. She knew she needed to put her thoughts in order, but it was not easy when each memory aroused feelings she thought she buried. While walking to the stage to check out the final preparations of the presentations, she spotted Ethan in the distance, talking to a group of locals. He gestured as he spoke, his eyes shining with an enthusiasm that caught her by surprise. It was different from Ethan that she had met years ago, more focused, more present. He no longer looked like the man who had left to seek success at any cost, but someone who was willing to build something significant. Seeing her, he said goodbye to the group and came toward him. The nervousness she felt was palpable, but she tried to hide him with a cautious smile. "Amelia," he started, stopping a few steps away. "I need to tell you something." "Another confession?" she asked, in a playful tone, though her voice shivered slightly. He smiled, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. "Actually, yes. I made a decision last night, after all that happened. I need to tell you before you hear from someone else." She crossed her arms, waiting. "I'm listening." Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering strength for each word. "I called my business board early today. I asked to get away from office. I will turn off completely as soon as they solve the details." Amelia was still, processing what he had just said. "Are you going, leave the company?" he asked, the disbelief evident in his voice. "Yes," he replied, with resolute calm. "I realized that I spent years focusing on the wrong things. I built a career, I got what many would call success, but the truth is that I never felt more empty. Snowbrook reminded me of what is important. What I really want." She blinked, trying to ignore the wave of emotions she threatened to overflow. "And what do you want, Ethan?" He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "I want to create something real. Something that has value. I want to reconnect with my roots, help this city grow without losing what makes it special. And I want to do it with people who matter to me. People like you." The silence between them was loaded, but not uncomfortable. Amelia felt her heart shoot, but this time, she didn't try to suppress. There was sincerity in his word, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that he was being completely honest. They walked together through the square, the food stalls exuding delicious cinnamon and chocolate aromas. In the distance, the children's choir was beginning to rehearse, its sweet voices filling the air with a Christmas melody. Ethan waited patiently as Amelia organized her thoughts, as if she knew she needed time to process. "I never thought I would stay here for so long," she finally said, looking at the Christmas tree in the center of the square. "When I returned to Snowbrook, I thought it would be temporary. A way to escape my creative block and help my grandmother. But now," she sighed, her teary eyes, Now I start to ask myself if running away was my mistake." Ethan watched carefully without interrupting it. She continued, "I always thought I needed New York to be who I wanted to be. To prove that I could achieve something bigger. But maybe what I need is here all the time." "Amelia," he said softly, taking her hand, "you can be amazing anywhere. You don't need New York to prove anything to anyone." She laughed slightly, wiping a tear that escaped. "Maybe I need to prove it to myself first." As the day advanced, Ethan and Amelia began working together in the latest festival preparations. Small gestures between them, a smile, a brief touch, looks that said more than words indicated that something was changing. It was not a complete resolution, but a beginning, a base on which something new could be built. When the night fell and the square was crowded with residents and visitors, Ethan took the stage to thank everyone for their dedication to the festival. His voice was strong, but there was a sincere emotion that made each word seem intimate. "Snowbrook is not just a city for me. It's a home. And this festival is the heart of this place. I promise to do whatever possible to ensure that Snowbrook remains special, authentic, and full of life, today and always." Amelia, standing next to the Christmas tree, felt her chest fill with something she didn't feel for a long time: hope. When he got off the stage, they exchanged a look, and she knew it was the beginning of something true. The festival night came with the brightness of a celebration that seemed to embrace the whole city. The lights blinked in harmony with the sound of laughter and Christmas songs that echoed through the square. The smell of cinnamon and hot chocolate hovered in the air, mixed with the cold snowfall that fell gently. Snowbrook looked magical, as if time had stopped to capture that perfect moment. Amelia was near the stage, observing the movement around while the last adjustments were made. The square was full of residents and visitors, many carrying bags with handcrafted gifts bought in decorated tents. Children ran with red caps as they carried steaming mugs, their eyes shining with the anticipation of night surprises. Despite the animation around him, Amelia was somewhat restless. In recent days, she and Ethan had become close in a way that seemed as natural as inevitable. He was different, more present, more connected, but the fear of repeating the mistakes of the past still surrounded it. And now she knew that the last piece of everything they had built together would be put to the test. "Ready?" Ethan's voice made her turn. He was standing next to him, dressed in a dark coat that contrasted with the snow on his shoulders. Her eyes had that characteristic glow that she recognized since the days of youth, but there was also something more, a focus, a determination that made him look more whole. "Ready," she answered, forcing a smile. He studied her for a moment, as if he could see beyond the calm facade she tried to maintain. "It will work," he said, the voice low, but full of conviction. "You made it all happen." "Not alone," said Amelia, feeling the warmth of her words in the cold around. "You were by my side." The two spent most of the night helping where they could. Ethan took care of the tents and supervised the small shows that took place on the sides of the square, while Amelia dealt with the organization of the main performances on stage. At some point she saw him carry candy boxes to one of the tents while talking to children around him, laughing at something he said. It was such a simple and meaningful view that it had to stop for a moment to absorb it. She realized something important at that time: Ethan was not just helping by obligation or to compensate for past mistakes. He really loved that city, just like her. And maybe it was time for her to stop fighting it. Later, when a group of youth from the choir began singing the Holy Night, Ethan appeared beside him again. He held 2 mugs of hot chocolate, one of which he handed over to her without saying anything. For a moment they were silent, just listening to the music and watching the lights of the central tree shine against the night sky. "I need to ask you something," he said finally, breaking the silence. Amelia looked at him, surprised by the seriousness in his voice. "Of course," she replied, trying to ignore her tightness in her stomach. "Do you believe in second chances?" He stared at her, and the weight of the question seemed more than just words. It was a request, an appeal. Amelia took a deep breath. "I think Mondays only work when people really change. And when they are willing to fight for it." Ethan smiled slightly. "I'm willing. With you. With Snowbrook. With all this." She felt her heart accelerate, but this time she didn't try to escape. "So I think I'm willing to try too." As night was advanced, everything seemed to flow perfectly. The tents were full, the lighted stage received charming performances, and the Christmas tree shone like the center of all magic. At the end of the night, when the countdown began to light the big star at the top of the tree, Amelia and Ethan were side by side with the residents, waiting for the culmination. When the star finally lit up, a collective sound of astonishment and joy ran through the crowd. Children applauded, adults smiled, and there was a sense of community that seemed stronger than ever. Ethan looked at Amelia, who was amazed at the scene. "You got it," he said softly. "No," she replied, looking at him. "We got it." After the crowd began to disperse, Amelia and Ethan remained in the square, now silent, but still shining with the festival lights. The snow was still falling, thin and delicate, covering the floor like a blanket of serenity. Ethan took her to a nearby bank, where they sat silent for a few moments. "I don't know how to thank all this," she said, looking at him. "For being here. For remembering what is important." He smiled, taking his hand. "You don't have to thank you. Snowbrook is my home as much as yours. And I will never leave it again." Amelia felt a wave of emotion so strong that it was hard to contain the tears. She looked at him, seeing not only the man he loved, but the man who was willing to fight for her and all that they could build together. "I won't escape again," she said, her trembling voice. "I want to be here. With you." And under the soft light of the Christmas tree, they hugged each other, leaving behind the sorrows of the past and finally starting a new chapter together. There was no regrets, only the promise of a shared future. Christmas night in Snowbrook seemed to leave a fairy tale. The festival was climaxing, and the central square was taken by an almost palpable energy. The main tree shone intensely with its golden lights, while the star at the top radiated a soft shine, as if they were blessing all the present. The snow fell slowly, covering the streets and roofs with a perfect layer, sparkling under the hanging lights. Amelia was near the stage, watching the movement around her. The children were finishing the last presentation of the choir, their angelic voices echoing in the night as a melody capable of warming to the colder hearts. She smiled, feeling a deep pride for everything they had achieved. The festival, which began with uncertainties and challenges, was now an absolute success, and the city seemed more united than ever. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Ethan's voice sounded behind her, deep and reassuring. Amelia turned and found him standing, the dark coat contrasting with the snow that was beginning to accumulate on her shoulders. There was something in her eyes, something she couldn't describe, but it made her feel like it's exactly where she should be. "It's more than that," she replied, with a soft voice. "It's perfect." Ethan stepped ahead, his fixed eyes on hers, but there was something different in his posture. He looked nervous, as if gathering courage to something bigger. "I need a minute with the crowd," he said, a slight smile bending his lips. Amelia arched an eyebrow, confused. "With the crowd? Why?" "Trust me," he replied, his calm tone, but with a brightness of anticipation. Before she could question him more, Ethan took the stage, taking the microphone from the event coordinator. The buzz of the square decreased when everyone realized that Ethan was about to speak. He looked at the crowd, but his eyes soon found Amelia's, as if she were the only person who mattered at that moment. "Good night everyone," he began, his voice resonating clearly and firmly. "I know this festival is a tradition in Snowbrook, something we all love and wait every year. But for me, this year was special in a way I could never have imagined." Amelia felt her heart shoot, and her hands, once relaxed, now holding the stage railing hard. He was talking to everyone, but each word seemed to be directed at her. "Snowbrook has always been my home," continued Ethan, his voice loaded with emotion. "Even when I left, a part of me never really left. Back here was like finding a part of me that I didn't know I had lost. And that was thanks to a particular person." Amelia's eyes widened, and she felt the heat rise to her face when she realized that all attention was turning to her. "Amelia Davis," he said, calling her by name like a public confession. "You taught me what it really means to belong to a place. What does it mean to fight for something bigger than yourself? And you showed me that love is not just a feeling, but a choice. A choice I make every day. And I choose you." The crowd sighed collectively, and some began to applaud, but for Amelia, the world seemed to have stopped. She felt the tears threaten to fall, but did not contain them this time. It was such a raw, real moment that it seemed impossible to resist. Ethan descended from the stage, walking to her as everyone watched. "I know I did everything wrong before," he said, now just talking to her, the low voice and sincerely loaded. "But this time, I'm not going anywhere. Snowbrook is my home, and you are my heart. I love you, Amelia." She laughed between tears, feeling the wave of emotion she was finally holding to take completely. "I love you too," she said, the voice failing slightly, but loaded with a certainty I hadn't felt for years. "And I'm ready to choose you too." The crowd began to applaud and scream words of encouragement, but all this seemed distant to Amelia and Ethan. He took his hand, leading her to the center of the square, right in front of the Christmas tree. The local band started playing a soft melody, and Ethan pulled Amelia to dance. She laughed, surprised, but let him lead her. As they twirled under the lights, with the snow falling around, everything seemed perfect. Each movement was a reminder that they had overcome the sorrows of the past, the uncertainties of the present, and the doubts about the future. There, under the bright tree and surrounded by the community that loved them, they were ready to start over. "So," said Ethan, with a mischievous smile as he spinned Amelia gently, "do you think Snowbrook is enough to keep you inspired?" "More than enough," she answered, with a shine in her eyes. "You are enough." And while music increased and snow continued to fall, Amelia and Ethan continued to dance, surrounded by Snowbrook's magic, but totally focused on each other. It wasn't the end of its story, it was just the beginning. Our story for today comes to an end, friends, but before we say goodbye, I need your help to keep this rhythm of stories alive. If this story moved, inspired, or simply entertained you, don't hesitate to give this video a like. It's as simple as a click, but it means the world to us. Do you want more stories like this one? Then subscribe to Happiness of Love and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss any of our new adventures. Remember, we have a new video every 2 days. Share this video with your friends and family, who knows? You might inspire someone to make a positive change in the world. Leave us a comment letting us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. We love reading your thoughts and connecting with you. And if you're watching this on your phone, don't forget to hit the hype button to show your enthusiasm and help us reach even more people with these inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of the Happiness of Love community. Your support is like the heartbeat of this channel, vital and full of life. Oh, and before you go, check out the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another amazing story you won't want to miss. See you in 2 days with another story that will take your breath away. Until then, keep the rhythm of love and inspiration alive, one beat at a time.